There are three people in the Obama administration who are driving the creation of this agenda. One is a man named Peter Orszag. He's a very bright guy. He chewed his teeth, if you will, down to the nubs in the Clinton years, trying to get healthcare passed. Peter Orszag is the architect of one of the three key mechanisms that have to be in place to make healthcare reform work. The second is a man named David Blumenthal, a former professor of mine at Harvard Medical School. David's a bright guy. He ran a policy institute at Harvard, and now he is Obama's chief of information technology for healthcare. This is piece number 2. And piece number 3 is a gentleman that Obama has recruited to essentially flesh out how financing, how the payments would actually go. And here's the way this system is viewed to come into place. Mr. Orszag would tell you that of the world of things we can do to people for a disease, let's just call it high blood pressure, there would be a government entity called the Center for Comparable Efficacy, which has been created in the February stimulus bill, by the way, that it shall and it will decide of all the myriad options available for high blood pressure, what is best, and those things will be paid for. Number 2, in order to ensure that the physicians that you see before you and any that may be in the room do what is best, health information technology will gain wide penetration, not because it increases efficiencies, not because I know your medications from CVS or Long's Drugs, not for all the nice and lovely things you hear in the news, but as David Blumenthal has written dozens of times in major scholarly journals, the New Journal of Medicine, among others, it's to put the doctors marching in lockstep to make sure that we give what is best and we do not give what is not. That's piece number 2. Piece number 3 is then we set a dollar amount that we allocate to the game, and we open the gates and let it all go. So here's the question. There's 300 million people in the United States. If you let out $1 trillion to pay for everything, is there rationing? Of course there is. I mean, please don't be so naive as to think there's rationing now in healthcare. It happens all the time. But will it be overt under the Obama plan? Absolutely. Why? There's only X amount of dollars for Y amount of people. So if you want to give everybody this much care, you got to cut it off. You want to give some people more, some people less. Now you get a little sticky. The question on the table of will there be rationing, how will immigration and all of these other things come into play? Simply put, in this context, you all can figure out the answers for yourselves now. If there are more people that make up the 300 million, some of those are illegal immigrants, that's just less money for the rest of you, rest of us, rest of everyone. It's all that there is to it. It doesn't need to be more complicated. I know it's a very emotional situation, but it's actually fairly clear-cut. The government is going to tell us, among all of the things that are good, are great, or not so good, what we should use. Computers will make sure doctors do it. They're tying our payments to our execution of those things now, today. They call them things like pay for performance, or worse, non-pay for non-performance. And it is the way for insurance payers, the financiers, to ensure that we only do what they want them to do. They not only are paying the piper, but they're naming the song. Big surprise. And the final piece of the puzzle, the dollar amount that will be allocated, rest assured, it's less than you want and not nearly enough.
This is one of the things, and this is the whole lesson that I got taught when I was a resident. And that was, I asked the question, they're doing a case, and I asked the surgeon the question, what is the value of this case on this patient? The survivability was a cancer. And the surgeon said something that has stuck with me for the rest of the time since that move on, and that is, if we never do this case, then we cannot advance and make this work better. And so the analogy is 20 years ago, we used to take the gallbladder out by making an incision. And then they introduced 20 years ago laparoscopic techniques to do that. When they did that, 50% of the people still converted to the open technique. And it took 6 hours, and they still didn't go home any faster. If we had been having this conversation 20 years ago about rationing and what we should do, we might say that we shouldn't really pursue laparoscopic techniques, looking through a camera to take it out with little incision. We should just go ahead and continue doing it the old-fashioned way. Now, fast forward 20 years later, it's not even 20 years later, it got advanced a lot quicker. Fast forward 20 years later, it's a 45-minute to an hour operation. The person goes home the same day. We invested something 20 years ago, and we're reaping the rewards today. And that is one of the problems with rationing that isn't talked about very much. How are you going to cut off the technology? If you ration something, it automatically sort of gets locked in an anachronism. It's sort of an anachronism. It just gets locked in that year. 20 years ago, 1989, 1990, it gets locked at that spot, and it's going to get locked. Certain things get locked in 2009 technology, and I think that's where you see these other systems, like in Great Britain, they're locked into these places because they have instituted rationing.
Has anyone recently shopped for a computer, laptop, or desktop at all? Has anybody given, I'm sure there are many choices of the brand we're buying, did anyone choose not to get the top of the line computer, middle of the road? Okay, man, so great. Did anyone choose to buy the top of the line, the best of the bunch? Okay, so I'm gonna ask the woman who bought the non-top of the line, if you were coming to me to have your heart disease fixed, and I offered you 3 plans, which one would you take? So I asked that only to make a point. If you want to control cost, it's not up to us. What do you want to pay for? And now I'll ask the next question, and maybe I'll get a volunteer if someone wants to field it. If I were to ask anyone in this audience whether you would be willing to allow your government, your payer, your insurance company, whomever, to pay $1 million for a treatment that would extend the life of a cancer patient, 10% chance of living 3 more months, would you say, sure, go ahead and fund that to Johnny across the street? Clearly, the woman back there, the liver transplant in the family there?
Can I speak to that?
Sure.
I'll speak to that because my husband's liver transplant cost $1 million, and our insurance company, thank God, paid for it. And, you know, at the time, he was 58 years old, and next week he's going to be 70. And
this is the most important point. Intellectually, we all might say, I'm not spending $1 million for that chance. Unless it's you, your mom, your dad, your son, your daughter, your brother, your sister. And that $1 million is a bargain. You gotta ask to look at her, hear her voice. The $1 million is a bargain. So any reasonable discussion you're asking to have about cost, you really have to find it within yourselves to say, well, what do I want to pay? What would I be willing to contribute? And here's the rub. There have been a lot of really brilliant mathematicians for a long time getting this wrong. We all know that if you take a dice or regular fair 6-sided dice and you roll it, the chance of rolling a 3 is 1 out of 6, right? Well, how many people do you know that would bet a quarter that you'll roll a 3, and others will bet $1,000? Value, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. And for anybody to tell me or you that this thing, this widget that's going to cure your heart disease is effective, it depends on 2 things. Whether you value it the same way I do, and what your perception of risk is. And that is such an individual, as Marco said at the beginning, so very intimate and personal. So if you're asking us, any one of us, to help you to solve intellectually for yourselves how to control cost, I'm throwing it back to you. We as a society have to have a real discussion. What do we value? What do we have in common for values? And at what point do the value where I think $1 million is a bargain for a 10% shot to live 3 more weeks or 3 more months? At what point do we cut that off? Trust me on this, I don't think, in my opinion, there's an answer. There are lots of them, and they'll take up lots of time, but I just throw it back to all of you to start asking this question of yourselves and not wait to come here to the Fest Parker on a Friday night. Do it at the coffee shops, do it at home, do it amongst yourselves.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to conclude our program.